And welcome back. You'll have to forgive the noise. I got several neighbors that are cutting their grass right now, which is something I'll have to do as well. But I just want to show you this. We're in the process. This is going to be part 2 so far of getting this engine prepped for removal. If you remember in the last video, we got exhaust, a lot of the electrical and so on and so forth disconnected. And we're picking things up on this part of the video, getting the torque converter bolts out. And as you can see, we've got our inspection plate removed, just like we did when we replaced this oil pan. And you can see one of the torque converter bolts right there. We've already gotten one taken out. They're 14mm bolts, in case you're curious. And I'll show you that here in a second. But you can see with the inspection plate removed, this little divot here in the oil pan, they give you just enough room. You can actually get, I'm going to show you what a 3/8, but you can get a 1/2 inch breaker bar up here if needed. And you can get it on there and you can see where that ratchet is in relation to the oil pan. So there's that guy. And in case you're curious, this is the 1/2 inch breaker bar with a 14mm impact socket on it as well. So like I said, it's not a lot of room in there to get some utility in there, but it looks like you may even have enough room in there to get a right angle impact, possibly. I don't have a right angle impact to try it, but at least when they designed the oil pan, they had enough of a design decision in there to give you this nice little divot in there to get those bolts out. Otherwise, that would suck. So that's what we're going to continue on. We're going to continue getting those torque converter bolts out, and then we'll continue with getting the wiring that you see here. And this is on the passenger side. You can see we've got to remove knock sensor wiring. We've got to move the crankshaft position sensor wiring and kind of get this piece out of here. And then we have starter wiring on this side as well as the starter. And I believe there is, yep, there's you might be able to see it right up there. Maybe if I put my finger on it, it's kind of dark, I apologize. But there's another knock sensor on this side that we need to get disconnected and out of here as well. So we're going to concentrate on those tasks. And then when we get those done, I'll bring you back. Talk to you in a bit. Bye. And welcome back. Sorry, but the lawn mowing in the neighborhood continues, so it's generating a lot of background noise. You had to forgive me. So I figured I want to show you this a little bit more detail. First of all, as I promised, and I forgot to in the last clip, but there's one of the bolts. Again, 14mm. And what I'm finding I can do, and they don't seem to at least be Loctited in, at least not in this one, is to put the 1/2 inch breaker bar on there, and then I could just kind of bump the bottom of the handle with my hand enough where they seems to be cracking them loose okay, but without rotating the engine at the same time. I guess if you had to, you could get something up in here to wedge this flywheel to keep it from going. But again, I'm finding that just the weight of the 1/2 inch breaker bar and just kind of bumping the bottom of the handle starts to break them loose, and then I can come up in there with a 3/8 ratchet again with a 14mm and just kind of finish spinning the rest of the way out. I'm gonna try to show that to you, but it's gonna be hard because I gotta hold the camera at the same time and this 1/2 inch breaker bar to hold it onto that bolt. Let's see here. See if I can get all of this situated. And again, I'm just kind of coming in here, bumping the bottom of the handle a little bit, kind of acting like an impact. I turned that ratchet to get a better bite on that bolt, a little bit better swing. And you can see that the transmission is obviously wanting to turn because we're applying torque. See here, let's see if I can bump that now, and then I'm in a little bit better position. Like I said, it's kind of hard to do with holding the camera. And there we go. Okay, that got it. So you can see we got towards the end of our travel there, but it probably didn't come out very well, and I apologize. But just to show you again, just kind of bumping the bottom of the handle. The bolt's now turning, so I can drop our breaker bar out of the way and get up in here with our 3/8 and just kind of finish spinning that out. Okay, there's number 3. A little bit rusty, but okay. So with that being said, like I said, we're going to concentrate on getting I think there's 4 bolts in this one, getting the 4th one out, and then continuing to disconnect some electrical. But when we get all that done, I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. And yes, again, the yard cutting background noise continues. So I just want to show you here that we've got our torque converter bolts at this point out. At this point, we're getting ready just to take. We've got our starter wires removed. You can see the one connector here, which goes to the knock sensor on the driver's side, which is right there. See it? Let me see if I can get my finger on it. I can point to it. You can see a bolt. Wait a minute. Maybe. Nope, I can't reach around it. You see it right there at about the center of the view. That's where that connector goes. The starter wire, the starter itself looks like it has just the 2 wires. You got your signal, your control, and then you got the main wire that comes down from your battery supply. Now you can see on this control wire, it's kind of the back half of this connector. It's seen better days. We're going to have to put a new connector on this. That's getting to be pretty cruddy and kind of broke up. And it's not due to misuse or anything. It's just due to age and heat cycles and so on and so forth. Now this starter had over top of it, sorry for the camera work, this heat shield here, which is held in place by just 2 of these bolts. And that's because obviously you can see that you got your exhaust manifold, which is kind of right on top of it, so they've just got that little shielding there to help keep the excess heat away. So now that we've got our wiring done, we can work on getting our last bit of our wiring pulled off on this side of the engine, and then we can also work on getting this starter out here. But I just wanted to show that to you in case you hadn't seen it before, that all 3 of these wires, at least on this model, a Ram, all come into the same wiring harness. You can just kind of see it light off there. With that being said, like I said, we're going to continue to work on it, and I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So you can see we're progressing. We've got our AC compressor out of the way. I did put gauges on this, and I'll show you this probably in a future video. Just quickly put a gauge on the low side fitting. We got about 100 pounds in that low side fitting, so we do have some refrigerant in the system. So the reason why the air conditioner didn't work last time, it could still be a bad clutch on the AC. It could still be too low of a refrigerant for the pressure switch over here to acknowledge it and allow it to run. Again, that's a later issue. But the point is, with it having refrigerant in the system and me not having a way to recover that refrigerant, you can kind of see the nice thing is we're probably over flexing these lines a little bit, but there's not much I can do about it right now. But like we were looking at earlier, these lines, at least on this point, are flexible. So once we got the compressor unbolted, again, just kind of swung it over here to the side to kind of get it out of the way. You can also, there's enough flex in the line. Now, I wouldn't suggest dangling it from these lines, but have something underneath it to support it. But you can also just kind of drop it between the sway bar here and the front. There's enough space in here. It'll just kind of drop and lay in place. We also went ahead and disconnected the wiring harness on this side from all of its electrical connectors here on the side of the fuse box. There were a couple of grounds, one right here on the frame, one right there on the side, and again, just kind of freed this entire wiring harness up on this side and just laid, as you can see, just laid it over on that side just to get it out of the way. And then we took this wiring harness as much as we could. Once we had its electrical connections from underneath finally disconnected as well, and just kind of pushed it off to the side. Again, just trying to eliminate as many obstacles as possible, so when we do go attempting to lift this engine out of here, we're not fighting wiring harnesses or have to disconnect stuff at the at the last minute. Now, and I've seen All Data do this before, but unfortunately All Data does not account for this being a four-wheel drive. And I'll show this to you when we get back underneath there. But when we dropped the front differential the first time, I made a comment. There was a brace that front differential actually attaches to, that's actually bolted to the side of the engine block. So if you follow the instructions for doing this, or at least the All Data instructions, pulling that center bolt out of that motor mount isn't going to get you where you need to go. At least not on this side of the engine, because the differential bolts into that brace. That brace is also bolted in to the motor mount, and the big old flat part of that brace is bolted to the side of the block. So just removing that center bolt from that motor mount, from what I can see, isn't going to get you where you need to go, because if you go to pull this engine up, you're going to be pulling on this brace. And again, I'll show you what I mean when I get back down there. You're going to be pulling on that brace, which has the front differential still attached to it. That brace also bolts to a section on the transmission housing. So the best I could think to do, if I can get all the bolts broken loose, is to not take the center bolts out of the motor mount like the way they suggest, but to unbolt the 4 bolts that bolt the brace to the side of the block. That way the brace, the motor mount, everything it's attached to can stay in the truck, and then we can just pull the engine out that we need. This brace is very similar on the passenger side, same setup, but if you were to remove the center bolt, and by center bolt I mean those 2 bolts you kind of see on top there, not center of the motor mount, because that won't get you what you need from what I can see. There's a set of bolts higher up that are right there. You can kind of see me pointing at them. Now if you were to take those loose, it looks like you'd be able to get the passenger side up, but I'm going to try the same thing on this side as well, because if we could just remove the 4 bolts that bolt the bracket itself to the side of the block, then we can get this out of here and get a better look at things. But yeah, that driver's side is going to be a little bit of a pain in the rear, because for whatever reason, even though we have a 4-wheel drive TRX4 selected, the engine removal instructions do not even comment about that brace. And with that brace being bolted to the diff, to the transmission bell housing, and to the side of the engine block, there's no way you're going to pull this engine out of here by just taking the center pins out of that engine mount. At least not that I can see. But what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and pause it, and then we'll get underneath, and I'll show you what I mean. But I'll bring you back in a minute. Bye. Okay, welcome back. So just real quick to show you what I was talking about. Remember, this is your front diff. These are the 3 bolts at the front of the front diff that bolt into this brace. This brace, as you can see, is bolted into the transmission bell housing in 2 spots. If you follow this brace back and look at the side of the block, you can see a bolt there, 1 at the bottom, and there's 2 on the other side, and you can see that this brace piece here goes up and bolts to the side of that engine block. So even if you remove, and I got my lights on them now, if you remove those 2 big bolts right there, and that will disengage this from the motor mount, this brace is still bolted to the block, which is still connected to all of this down here. So just removing that bolt there and that bolt there from the center, that's not going to get this block to release. So the only thing I could think to do would be, is if you didn't unbolt this brace, is to take these 3 bolts out here from the front diff, take that bolt out there and that bolt out there for the transmission bell housing, That would free this piece up from the front diff and the transmission bell housing. And then if you did remove those two big center bolts right there, that should get the engine to release and be able to take this bracket piece with it. But that might be a little bit of a pain in the rear, fighting this piece, trying to get this out of here while you pull the engine out. That's why I'm thinking it might be easier, if we can, just to break these 4 bolts loose and just leave this reinforcement plate where it's at. But the step we're on right now is what I want to do is get the engine hoist adapter that we purchased, make sure that it will bolt and fit onto this engine. It should. It's listed to work for a 5.7, 6.1 and 6.4 Hemis. So as long as that will do, then what we'll do is we'll get the cherry picker in here next, start picking up on the engine a little bit to get the pressure off, and then we could start working on getting the transmission bell housing bolts out, and it looks like there's about 3 on each side. And then we could try to get these bracket bolts busted loose first. I'm gonna work on these bracket bolts first, because if those don't come out, then we have to rethink what we're gonna do on the driver's side here. So if these will come out, then we'll get our transmission bell housing bolts out, and then we should be ready to attempt to lift this thing out of here. But I'm gonna get to work on that adapter, and I'll bring you back and show you what that looks like. Talk to you in a bit. Bye. And welcome back. So you can see we got our little foam insert removed from where our MSD solenoids are sitting. We also removed the VVT solenoid that actuates the phaser, because it needs to be out of the way in order for this bracket to fit. So to show you that, what you see down there, that's your VVT actuator. Controls oil pressure to the phaser. So where this thing mounts is a bit of a puzzle. This is the mount that mounts onto the block, and then it has what they call a little eagle adapter, and I'll show you this here. Just place this down in here temporarily. You can see that's the part number for the eagle. I'll get you the name and number of where I got this. Now, like I said before, I may have made comment about this already. Now, this engine adapter for the lift was a bit pricey. I'm going to be honest with you. So if you're only going to be doing this once, there are several other ways of doing this. But since we'll be pulling this one out, putting another engine in, and then we'll also be potentially pulling, not potentially, but pulling an engine out and putting a different engine into the red one behind us, or perhaps even having to pull the engine out of the red one and use as the donor on this one based on what the machine shop says. Then basically, I guess what I'm getting at is that we knew that we were going to be using this adapter more than once, so cost effective wise, it kind of at least helped justify the cost of this tool. But the way this fits in is that we've got our eagle adapter, because we have eagle cylinder heads on this particular Hemi. They give you hardware that bolts into the block on top that comes with the adapter. And what I had to do, as well as removing, let me just find another spot for this bracket here. There we go. What I had to do is remove a little bit of the wiring harness for the MSD solenoids. Also, speaking of electrical connections, make sure you disconnect your MSD solenoids from your main engine wiring harness before you go try pulling your block out of here. Is that this wiring harness was held in place in this bolt hole. So you'll see 2 bolt holes in this particular valley. That's where the end of that utility is bolting into, is here and here. Then it's going to swing up front and sit right about here, which is where that adapter comes into play. This adapter hooks into that top hole in that bracket, and it goes around that front stud that's in the front of your water pump there. And then this comes with a bolt that bolts onto the front of that. So it's a little bit of a puzzle. Let me go ahead and pause the camera at this point, and then I'll bring you back once we have it assembled on here and show you what it all looks like. Talk to you in a bit. Bye. And welcome back. So here we go. You can see we got our mount mounted. You can see those two bolts that I bolted to in the back, which again were just one on the driver's side not being used, and on the passenger side it was just being used for this hold down for the MDS harness. And you can see the front of it here. So that's the Eagle adapter. You can see where it bolts into the front of this piece and then kind of goes around this stud piece here. And I will look and put the bolt, the factory bolt, onto that. And I mean, it's not going to go anywhere. It doesn't look like it's going to have possibility of pulling forward. It's pretty sturdy, but I will say I did have to trim it. You can see there, you can see this angled cut that I had to take out of this bracket. You can see how close it is to the housing for the VVT solenoid. It was hitting that and keeping this from coming flush and mounting up. Now, even with that said, that allowed me to attach it, but I will tell you that this piece, this flat piece, should have probably come forward by about 1/8 of an inch or so, because it's not quite. Now you tighten this bolt up, I can get this flat, but you can see this bracket right here is kind of cocked at a little bit of an angle, so that this head of this tool should have come out maybe about 1/8 an inch or so or more, and it'd have been fine. But again, you can tell it was kind of, I guess, hand cut, handmade. Again, the tool itself, it looks fine, but I did have to adjust for it, because you can tell that this bottom piece right here, you can tell this was cut out of probably a template or something. They just didn't come in far enough to clear that. Now, that may not be the case on a 6.1 or 6.4. It may be different, but you can see we were able to cut it to at least get it to work. It looks like this will work for our needs to get this engine out of here. If it doesn't, you'll know about it. And I did have to cut that with a Dremel, which is why that looks kind of a little bit not clean, that clean of a cut. It did take quite a few cutting discs, because this, you can see it's a rather thick piece of metal. Okay, but with that being said, now that we've got our attachment on this engine at this point, I need to get the cherry picker in here, get that situated, get some of the load off of this engine, and then we can go underneath and start taking the bell housing bolts, but more importantly, seeing if we can break free the engine mounting bolts on those plates. And then when we get ready to pull it, we'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So we're just in the process of getting our bell housing bolts out, which I believe we got them all out at this point. Just take note that there are 2 different sizes of bell housing bolt. Not sure why someone decided that was a necessity, but they did. So the lower engine block to bell housing bolts are 16 millimeter. It's these 2 you see here, and then there's 4 more that are 14 millimeter, and they just go up the side. So you have 1 big one at the bottom on each side, and then 2 smaller ones that go up. So you've got 3 on the left, 3 on the right. The very top ones are actually easier to get to going over the top of the motor, since you have the intake off, because they're on kind of this corner and that corner, and they're just a lot easier to get to from up top rather than the bottom. Be mindful that the 2 top ones also thread through some hold down brackets for various vent tubes and pipes and fuel pipes, things of that nature. Various brackets bolt to the top 2 bell housing bolts. We did manage to get all 8 of our engine mount I hate to say it, bracket to cylinder block bolts out. There were only 8 that I could see, 4 on each side. I believe that's all there is. We're going to find out here shortly. Do keep in mind that on some of those, you're going to need swivel sockets and plenty of extensions to get the various angles you need if you choose to do it that way. Again, I'm not saying it's the best way that needs to be done. And when we go to pull this engine out of here, we may find out there's something else that we need to take off as far as the front drivetrain that we're currently unaware of. We'll find out here shortly. But if it does work, just be mindful that if you're going to do it that way, where you unbolt that, again, that plate from the block, that they are Loctited in, and there are a couple of them that you can only get to with a ratcheting wrench, but you can still get enough leverage on it to break the torque. But to get the other ones out, you will need a healthy set of swivel extensions, things of that nature. I'm going to show you this part number here, and I'll cover it again at the bit. I'll make another bit to put at the beginning of this video, but I picked this up this week just looking for some 3/8 swivels, and found this also by Astro. There's the part number there, 78344. You can see that it is a nice little 3/8 set of swivel sockets. So, and these came in quite handy to get all of those motor mount bolts out, like I said, in the various different angles that you needed to break those free. So again, you're gonna need these and plenty of extensions. There's not really enough room for what I could see to get up in there with 1/2-inch hardware. That's why I'm just using again a lot of 3/8, a lot of 3/8 extensions, and so on and so forth. But we're gonna get the cherry picker hooked back onto our loop that you see there in the center, and start shaking this engine and seeing if we can get it separated from the transmission bell housing at this point, and hopefully work on now getting this this bad boy out of here. So we're going to work on that, and then I'll bring you back as we make progress. Thank you much. Okay, welcome back. You can see we got a drip pan in place. We've actually got it off of the dowel pins of the transmission at this point, and we're just kind of lifting the engine up and then pulling it forward, lifting up, pulling it forward, in order to make sure that we're clearing everything. But it is loose, and it's just a matter of getting it finagled up and out of here. Whew. But here's what we're looking at so far. We're just letting the rest of that coolant kind of drain out of the water pump there, because remember, we kind of left all this on because we were in the process, knew that we had to have that one, at least that one front stud in place for this adapter assembly for this engine mount. But we're going to continue to work on this, and I'll bring you back and get you a little shot of you can see the transmission bell housing, that we're separated from it at this point. And again, we're just taking it slow, making sure that we don't break anything. But I'll bring you back as we progress. I'm sorry, I would kind of put you in the tripod and show you this in real time, but it's taking two of us to make sure that we get this thing out of here without potentially breaking something, and it's just hard to keep up with the camera. But again, you're not missing much. You can see again that we got our mount in there, and so it does confirm that there are 6 bell housing bolts. Once those are done, I just got underneath with a little mini pry bar and pried the engine forward to break it free from the dowel pins on the transmission. And then once we did that, we're able to just kind of come up a little bit at a time on the engine hoist, pull it forward a little bit, pull it forward a little bit, pull it forward. And I had to go almost all the way out, as you can see on the engine hoist here, for its weight, just because how deep they have these Hemi engines sitting inside of this engine compartment in order for that hook to be able to reach up to that mount. But with that being said, we're going to continue to work on this, and then I'll bring you back. Thank you much. Okay, welcome back. Just wanted to show you this here. It is possible to get this out of here with this condenser in the way, although it being a pain in the rear. You just have to kind of fight the condenser. And again, you notice I'm keeping my distance away from this because it's a rather heavy load supported by a pendulum. Everyone keep their distance, keep your hands, fingers, toes, and everything out of this. You can see that we had to come up until we could clear the oil pan from the top cross member. We're going to pull the engine back some, continue to come up so we clear the hood. And then once we get the bottom of the oil pan, clearing that top cross member, we should be good at this point. I don't see anything that got damaged on the way out, other than we may have inadvertently bent some pipes on this condenser, but I don't know, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But here we go, that's what we got right now. Again, as with anything when you're doing something like this, safety, it's a really heavy engine block. You notice, again, just keep out from underneath this in case it decides to swing on you. But we're going to continue to work on getting this thing out, and then I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So you can see that is one empty engine compartment. Well, not empty, but you get it. So I'm just looking over. The good thing is it doesn't look like we snagged anything. We didn't grab any wiring harnesses on the way out. We didn't tear anything on the way out. You can see a bit better now this engine mounting configuration, where over here you see those two bolts you could take out, and that would take this plate with it. It would leave it attached to the block. But over here, if you were to do the same thing, you've got this, which is bolted to the block, but it's also a part of this brace that you can see bolts to the transmission and also bolts to the differential with those group of 3 bolts back there. So again, that's why I did it that way, by taking it off of that flat mount there. Whether that was the right way or the wrong way, it's possible when you pull this, because again, all data didn't cover it. Maybe since it's a 4-wheel drive, you know, they want you to drop the front differential and then pull that whole brace piece out. I don't know, but again, this worked for what we needed. And just to show you here, we're not completely in the safety zone, but we're a hell of a lot better off. We no longer have it suspended, you know, 4 feet above our heads. But this is it, ladies and gentlemen. This is the poor, sickly motor that we attempted the upper engine rebuild on, but as we all know, did not go over well. And now what we need to do, and I'll have to find something to put this on for a little while. I need to go out and get an engine stand. Yes, I know I pulled an engine and I don't even own an engine stand, but what we need to do now is strip this engine down per the machine shop's words in the state in which we want to receive it back. Now, typically when you do this on a machine shop, you have what they call a short block and you have what they call a long block. Short block being the cylinder heads aren't attached, the pistons aren't usually installed, no crank, no nothing. They just machine the block, they machine the heads, they give you everything back in parts, and you put the short block together and make it a long block. A long block would be kind of what you see here, where you've got your crank, your timing components, your water pump, your heads, everything installed. Well, what I want them to do is to, if the block is viable, machine the block, go ahead and put the rotating assembly in, so that way I know the piston rings are gapped correctly. Again, not to say that we couldn't do it, but I want to make sure that it's done correctly when they either bore or hone out the cylinders. And don't worry, we'll get into doing piston rings and gapping and things of that nature when we start work on the red 2012 that we're going to hopefully drop a 6.4 liter into. And so I want them to go over the block, do what they need to do to it, put the new piston rings, pistons, crank, and do all the connecting rods. Basically put the rotating assembly in, and then do the work they need to do to the heads, and then stop. Because we know everything else we can do. We can put the cylinder heads back on, the timing, put the cam back in, the timing set, the water pump, you name it. Get it back into where it's a long block, and then you drop it back into our vehicle. Because I'll be honest with you, being able to get these heads on and off and do this work in here, hell of a lot easier with the engine out of the vehicle than it is with it in the vehicle. It'll just be an interesting fight to get this back down in there, get it all lined up, and get it on those transmission dowel pins, so we can start bolting everything back together. So that's going to be the next steps, is that we're going to work on this. We're going to work on getting this tore down. I'll bring you back for some of those shots.
And then once we get this item tore down into the state that it needs to go to the machine shop, then we'll cut it a video at that point, and then it'll just be up to however long the machine shop takes. Well, one, they're going to look at it, tell us whether it's viable. If it is viable, obviously, then we'll be at the mercy of however long it takes them to get it done. But in the meantime, I've already contacted the gentleman who wrote the tune for the 2500 that you saw. Since we have this out, yes, it'll be a little bit more money. We're going to put a slightly better cam in this, do a full MDS delete, which means it's going to get Hellcat lifters, an updated cam along with the engine work. And according to my tuner, since it is it's still going to be a mild cam. It's going to be a mild idle. And according to my tuner, it won't require a custom tune because the cam's not going to be that overly aggressive, but it'll still be better than stock. So that's going to be the plan for this. And my tuner's already told me that getting part kits are about a month out. So we can get parts in from the tuner while at the same time the machine shop is doing what they need to do, and hopefully they'll get done right about the same time. If not, and if it takes longer to get the parts back, it takes longer to get the parts back. Now, one thing that we can do is that even though the engine is missing, we can come through here and reconnect our wiring harnesses to our TIPM, and just what we need just to get the electrical functional, even though the engine won't be connected, and the PCM will basically have a massive coronary when it sees a bunch of sensors not attached. But what we can do is, while we're waiting for this to come back from the engine, from the machine shop, we'll be able to go through and troubleshoot the other issues and fix those that we know that are broken, like wheel speed sensors. We can go ahead and get those changed out. Go ahead and work on the lighting circuits, because we have an issue with the front passenger lighting circuit, and we know that we have an issue with a rear driver light on this one. So we can work on that. We can work on the blend door actuator that needs to be replaced. We can do all that kind of stuff that doesn't require an engine to be installed. Again, just trying to get ahead of the game here. But just to show you, it's doable. You can do this in the driveway. You can do this with hand tools. We did it, although everything hurts now, to be honest with you. It can be done. I would strongly, again, suggest that you're going to need a lot of extensions. You're going to need swivels. And if you've got electric ratchets, by all means, bring them. It'll definitely help. It wasn't too bad getting the engine out, as you saw here. I will post a link to where I got this adapter, but like I said before, be forewarned that this adapter is not cheap. So if you're only going to be doing this once, there's several other videos on YouTube that shows individuals using the bolt right here where the ground's at, and the bolt right here, hooking up a set of chains to it and pulling it out that way. I felt this was a little bit safer of an option, because we're pulling on what the mounting point that you're meant to pull on, as well as we know that we got to get an engine in. We know that we got work that we have to do to the 2012. Plus, with this being a Hemi bracket, every vehicle I own, with the exception of 2 Jeeps, all have Hemi motors in them. So if need be, this can definitely get a lot of use. So it kind of helped justify the cost. But again, just be forewarned about that. And again, as you saw, as we covered before, I did have to cut that corner out of that bracket to get it to clear, so it wasn't hitting up against the housing where that VVT solenoid went, because with it hitting against the housing, it wouldn't let these bolts all line up to get this adapter on here. But with that being said, I'm gonna let you go. We're gonna work on this a little bit and get these heads and stuff off of here, and make this heads, front timing cover, and everything off, just to make this a lot lighter to deal with. And you're not missing anything. I've got previous videos that shows us tearing all of this stuff down, but just to give you the around view. There it is. And just like with doing any engine job, yes, no matter how much liquid and fluid you drain out of this, you're going to get 10 times more fluid out than you put in. Okay, awesome. With that, I'll let you go, and I'll bring you back in a bit when we get a little bit more of this tore off. Thank you much. Bye. Well, ladies and gentlemen, here it sits. I did run out, as you can see, and just got a real quick, pretty inexpensive engine stand, and unfortunately, you kind of get what you pay for, but at least it's on a stand. We just kind of have a little drip, we have one of our drip pans underneath of it, just letting the residuals drain out. And as you can see, we've got the cylinder heads already removed, the water pump on front. And one correction I need to say earlier, that bracket that goes on top that we bought for lifting the engine out, I thought that it clipped on one of the bolts for the water pump, and as you can see, that's not the case. It's actually one of the bolts for the front timing cover. So you can actually remove the water pump and everything else from the front of this and just leave that one bolt there, leave your timing cover in place and leave that one bolt there, and that adapter will clip onto that just fine. But as you can see, we've got the cylinder heads off and have this on the engine stand. Oh wow. The only problem with this particular stand is, and it's one from Northern Tool, it wasn't too terribly expensive. I will be looking for a better one, because the weight of just the block on this bends this forward enough, it actually pinches this in here, and you can barely rotate the block. So we need a better one, but this will work for what we need in order to get the engine tore down, to get it off to the machine shop. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the MDS solenoids out the top, get those out of there. We'll be dropping the oil pan on this again, pulling the windage tray out, oil pickup tube. We'll be taking the front timing cover off, cam, all the timing gears. Obviously, we'll be pulling a pulley off. We're going to get this down to just a block that has the crank installed and the pistons, and that's it. And then for our heads, you can see one down there on the tray. We're just going to drop the exhaust manifolds off and leave the valves in. That way they can, evaluate the valves and the heads, and then obviously evaluate the block. So as long as they come back and they say that this particular block is good, we'll proceed forward with the machine work. While they're machining it, like we were talking about earlier, we'll get the upgraded cam. We'll get Hellcat lifters this time, which will be non-MDS lifters, because we'll be deleting the MDS system off of this block. Yeah, it's going to cost a bit more money to do that, but as you can see, we've got the engine out. No better time to do anything that you want to do to it at this point, because everything is just so much more accessible being out of that truck. The fun part will be putting the engine back in once it's all reassembled. But for the time being, like I said, it's nice because as you can see, we can rotate it upside down. We can definitely drop this oil pan out of here now without having all the myriad of issues that we had when we did it inside the truck. And like I said earlier, you obviously can do this. We did this out in the driveway with the cherry picker and about 95-degree heat. So just a bit warm. And yes, we will be removing all the sensors off this. The other knock sensor, just going to get this down, like I said, to a bare block that still has the crank installed and the pistons. And then we'll get it down to the machine shop and let them do their magic to it, or come back and tell us that it's not worth saving. Either way, we'll definitely know for sure. And we did take the flex plate off already, as you can see here, in order to get it onto the engine stand. It's not too terrible. It's just broke them all loose with an impact gun. They were all Loctited in. It looked like it was blue Loctite. And those flex plates, and you'll see this when we go to reassemble it, but the flex plate, because of the bolt spacing, there's only one way that flex plate can go on. But the nice thing is, you can see here, there is absolutely no leakage in that rear main seal at all. And considering this engine has 190+ thousand miles on it, it's actually not too bad. With that being said, again, I will let you go, and I'll say it again, and I won't give you the name brand. I'll just tell you that I did pick this up at Harbor Freight. Don't buy one of these stands unless you're in a need like we're in a need where we just had to have one. And like I said, I will be looking for something of better quality, because like I said, with the weight of the engine on this, it bends this forward and actually pinches this from rotating. It's a pain in the rear, to say the least. But with that being said, that's it. I'm going to call this video at this point. Getting a little bit long-winded as it is. And like I said, we'll chase other items on the truck that we can chase that don't require the engine to be in there. And don't worry about not seeing me take the timing cover and everything off. There's 2 other playlists that one that deals with this truck and one that deals with the 2500 out there that show removing this crank pulley and the timing cover and taking the cam and lifters and all that fun stuff out. That being said, I'll let you go, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you much. Bye.